Every night, the king locked his bedroom door from the inside. Every morning, he unlocked it himself. For 10 years, nobody questioned this, until the night a servant forgot to leave and saw what the queen became when the candles went out. Queen Seraphine was considered the most beautiful woman in the known world, not just in her kingdom, not just in her generation. In the entire recorded history of the realm, no portrait had ever captured a face like hers. Artists wept when they tried. Poets abandoned language entirely. Even her enemies arriving at the palace gates with drawn swords and battle plans had been known to simply stop and stare when she appeared on the balcony. She had dark eyes that seemed to hold candlelight even in full daylight, hair so black it appeared almost blue, skin like she had been carved from something more valuable than marble, and she moved through the palace with a grace so complete that servants stopped breathing when she passed. King Aldrin had married her 10 years ago, after a courtship that lasted exactly one afternoon. He had seen her once across a crowded hall and had not been able to form a complete sentence for 3 days. People said it was love. Aldrin had never corrected them, but the truth was more complicated. The truth was that from the very first night of their marriage, Aldrin had known something was wrong. Not wrong in a way he could explain, not wrong in a way that showed on her face, which remained perfect, always, in every light, at every hour. Wrong in the way that things are wrong when you sense something and your mind refuses to let you look at it directly. He locked the door every night. He told himself it was habit. He told himself it was nothing. For 10 years, he told himself it was nothing. And for 10 years, he almost believed it. It was a servant girl named Mira who ended the 10 years of almost. She was 16 and new to the palace, and she had not yet learned the unspoken rules, the most important of which was this: never be in the royal corridor after the evening bells. She was carrying a candle and a forgotten piece of mending when the bells rang. She pressed herself into a doorway alcove as the queen moved past, not wanting to be seen, not wanting to be scolded for being somewhere she was not supposed to be. She watched Queen Seraphine enter the royal chamber. She watched the door close. She waited, and then, because she was 16 and curious, and had not yet learned what curiosity costs in palaces, she moved to the keyhole, and she looked through it. What she saw on the other side made her drop the candle, made her press both hands over her mouth, and made her run, barefoot and silent, all the way to the far end of the palace, where she sat in a corner until morning and told no one, because what she had seen made no sense. The most beautiful woman in the world was not in that room. Something else was. Then she saw the dogs. The palace kept 6 large hunting dogs in the eastern courtyard. They were gentle with everyone. Mira watched this from a window above, and she understood then that she had not imagined anything. She went to the one person she thought might believe her, an old physician named Carden, who had served the palace for 40 years. She told him what she had seen through the keyhole. Carden listened without interrupting. When she finished, what Carden told Mira that evening changed everything she thought she knew about the kingdom she had come to serve. There were old stories, he said, older than the kingdom itself. about creatures that wore beautiful faces the way people wore clothes, that fed not on flesh, but on something less visible and more essential, the warmth that keeps a person alive from the inside, the light behind the eyes, the thing that makes a living person different from a body that is merely breathing. They could not survive in sunlight without significant pain. They were most powerful in the dark, and they could maintain the appearance of a human face indefinitely, as long as they were feeding regularly. A king who grew paler by the month, a queen whose face never aged, a locked door every night for 10 years. Carden said, "I have suspected something for 2 years, but suspicion is not proof, and presenting a king with suspicion about his beloved queen is not something a physician does if he wishes to remain a physician or alive." Mira said, "What do we need?" He told her. That night, they moved through the palace carefully. The physician knew which floorboards creaked. The servant girl knew which corridors the night guards favored. Together, they reached the door of the royal chamber. They listened. Silence from inside. Carden produced a small mirror on a long handle, the kind used for examining the backs of patients' throats. He slid it under the door at an angle. He adjusted the angle twice. Then he passed it to Mira and let her look. What she saw in the mirror was the queen standing at the window with her back to the door. In the moonlight, her posture was different. Her neck was longer than it should have been. Her arms hung lower than arms hung, and her shadow on the wall behind her did not match the shape she was casting it with. It moved independently, slowly, as if it was breathing on its own. Mira pulled the mirror back. She looked at Carden. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything, because they both now knew what they were dealing with. The question was no longer what the queen was. The question was what to do about a monster who had spent 10 years becoming the most loved person in the palace, including by the king, who would not believe them, who might not be capable of believing them anymore. They needed the king to see it himself. This was Mira's idea, and Carden thought it was either the bravest or the most foolish plan he had heard in 40 years of palace service, and he could not decide which. She would leave a mirror inside the royal chamber before the evening bells, not on the wall, on the floor, angled upward, placed behind the tall wardrobe that stood in the chamber's corner, positioned so that anyone lying in bed could not see it, but anyone standing at the window in moonlight would cast a reflection visible to anyone lying awake in the dark. She had exactly one opportunity to place it. She took it. That night, the king did not sleep. He had not truly slept in months, he realized. Lying in the darkness of his own chamber, he had been closing his eyes and waiting for morning and calling that sleep. But tonight he lay with his eyes open and watched the ceiling and tried to remember the last time he had felt warm, and he could not. He heard the queen rise. He heard her move to the window, which she did sometimes, which he had long since stopped questioning. He lay still and breathed slowly and listened to the particular silence of his wife standing in moonlight, and then something caught his eye, a faint reflection from the corner of the room, something angled on the floor behind the wardrobe that he had not noticed before. He lay very still and he looked at it, and in that small reflected piece of moonlit mirror, He saw what he had been not looking at for 10 years. He did not move. He did not speak. He lay completely still with his eyes open, and he understood. Finally and completely. 10 years of locked doors and growing, cold and dogs pressing against walls, and a face that never aged, and warmth that left him by the month like water from a cracking vessel. And he understood something else, that the thing standing at his window, in his wife's beautiful shape, had been keeping him alive deliberately, not out of anything resembling love, but because a dead king raises questions, and a slowly fading king raises none. In the morning, when the queen left the chamber, the king rose. He did not call for his guards. He did not send for the physician. He walked to the corridor where Mira was already working, as if she had been waiting. And he looked at the girl who had placed the mirror, and he said, simply, quietly, "What do we do?" Mira had been thinking about this for 2 nights. She told him. It was not simple. It was not safe. But it was the only thing that had any chance of working, because you cannot fight a creature that wears a beautiful face with swords. You can only fight it with a truth it cannot hide from, and the thing hiding inside Queen Seraphine had one weakness. One moment every day when the beautiful face slipped and the real one showed. Dawn. That precise moment when night becomes day. That fraction of a second when the darkness retreats and the light arrives. That was the only moment it could not control what it was. And the king needed every person in the palace to be watching when that moment came. The dawn came. The court was assembled on the pretense of a royal announcement. Queen Seraphine stood beside her husband on the palace steps, composed and perfect and breathtaking as she had been every morning for 10 years. And then the first true light of the sun touched her face. It lasted less than a second, but every person present saw it. The face that was underneath, the face that was real, and the queen, for the first time in 10 years, had nowhere to hide. The creature that had spent a decade becoming beloved in a palace looked out at hundreds of faces that now knew exactly what it was, and it understood in that moment that the king it had been slowly consuming had found the one weapon it could not defend against. Not a sword, not fire, a mirror, and dawn, and a servant girl who had not yet learned what curiosity costs in palaces, and who it turned out had paid exactly the right price. This was the Untold Realm. Subscribe now, because next week another secret will be revealed.